$38 trillion. It's a number so large, the human brain can't even visualize it. But while the world is distracted by political theater and celebrity drama, a silent predator is devouring the very foundation of the American dream. The math no longer works. We've reached the point of no return, a mathematical dead end that the elites are desperate to hide from you. Why is the mainstream media silent? Because the truth is terrifying. The trap has already been sprung. Today, we're going inside the $38 trillion trap. And why? For the first time in history, there might be no escape. To understand how America walks straight into a $38 trillion trap, you have to forget what you were taught in school. Forget the clean timelines. Forget the patriotic framing. Forget the idea that this was all accidental. What happened wasn't chaos. It was a decision. A series of them. Quiet, deliberate, and perfectly timed so the public wouldn't resist. Rewind to 1971. Back then, money still had a leash. Dollars were tied to gold. Not perfectly, not purely, but enough to impose discipline. It meant governments couldn't just create money out of thin air without consequences. Every new dollar had to answer a question. What is it backed by? That single constraint kept the system honest, or at least honest enough to survive. Then one weekend, that leash was cut. No public vote, no national debate, no emergency broadcast explaining what was about to happen. Just a short announcement from Richard Nixon, framed as a temporary measure. Temporary. That word was the first deception, because nothing about it was temporary. The moment the dollar was detached from gold, money stopped being a thing and became an idea, a promise, and promises are easy to break when the bill comes due decades later. From that moment on, the game changed completely. The United States gained a superpower, the ability to print unlimited money. Unlike every superpower in history, it was abused immediately. At first, it didn't look dangerous. It looked like prosperity. Credit expanded. Markets rose. Homes became more expensive. But people were told that meant they were getting richer. The illusion worked because the pain didn't arrive all at once. Here's the part most people never realize. Fiat money doesn't collapse quickly. It collapses slowly, then suddenly. The early years feel good, too good. Governments can fund wars without raising taxes. Politicians can promise programs without explaining how they'll be paid for. Growth looks endless. Debt feels harmless. And anyone who questions it is labeled paranoid, outdated, or anti-progress. But underneath that comfort, something toxic is building. When money is no longer backed by something real, it has to be backed by something else. In this case, it was backed by debt. Every dollar created after 1971 wasn't wealth, it was obligation. A claim on future labor, future productivity, future taxpayers who hadn't even been born yet. That's the part they never tell you. The system survives by pulling value from the future and spending it today. That's why this trap feels invisible. No one generation ever sees the full cost. Each one inherits a little more debt, a little less purchasing power, and a little more anxiety. They're told this is normal, that prices always rise, that life just gets more expensive, that this is how modern economies work. That's the second deception, because prices don't rise naturally. They rise when money weakens, and money weakens when too much of it exists. After 1971, restraint disappeared, debt exploded, but instead of sounding alarms, institutions built narratives. Economists invented new language to make the danger sound manageable. Deficit spending, quantitative, easing, accommodative, policy, fancy words designed to anesthetize the public, to turn something catastrophic into something technical. Meanwhile, the system learned a dark lesson. Debt doesn't matter as long as people believe it doesn't. Confidence became the real currency. As long as the world trusted the dollar, the United States could borrow endlessly, and so it did. Every crisis became an excuse to borrow more. Every recession justified new money creation. Every emergency pushed the line further, until the line disappeared altogether. Here's where the illusion becomes truly sinister, because once debt reaches a certain scale, it stops being repayable. The numbers simply don't work anymore. At that point, The goal is no longer to fix the problem. The goal is to manage perception, to delay realization, to keep people calm, while the system quietly cannibalizes itself. Think about it. If the government admitted the truth that the debt will never be paid back, it would trigger panic overnight. Markets would freeze, trust would evaporate. So instead, they promise stability. They redefine success. They celebrate slowing inflation as victory. Even when prices are still rising faster than wages, they move the goalposts and hope no one notices. And most people don't, because daily life still functions. Stores are open, paychecks arrive, Netflix loads. Normalcy becomes proof that nothing is wrong. But that's how financial collapse always looks right before it accelerates. Calm on the surface, rot underneath. The real genius of this system isn't the money printing. It's how responsibility is blurred. Who caused this? No single person, no single law, no single administration. That's intentional. When blame is diffuse, accountability disappears. Everyone shrugs, everyone points elsewhere, and the machine keeps running. The math is where the illusion finally collapses. This is the part they hope you never slow down enough to look at, because once you do, the whole story falls apart. Forget opinions, forget ideology. Numbers don't care about narratives. And right now, the numbers are screaming that this system is running on borrowed time. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The United States is no longer borrowing money to grow. It's borrowing money just to survive, just to stay upright, just to keep the lights on. And the fastest growing expense in the entire federal budget isn't healthcare, or defense, or social programs. It's interest, pure interest, money paid for the privilege of owing money. Let that sink in for a second. The country that claims to be the most powerful on earth is now spending more money paying interest to creditors than it spends defending itself with the largest military in human history. Not weapons, not soldiers, not security. Interest. That's not strategy. That's desperation. And here's why this matters more than anything else. Interest compounds. It doesn't care if the economy slows down. It doesn't care if people are struggling. It doesn't care about elections. It grows automatically, relentlessly. Every year the debt gets bigger, the interest gets heavier, and at a certain point, the system crosses a line where it can never recover. That line has already been crossed. Think about it like this. If you take out a loan and your income grows faster than the interest, you're fine. You can manage it. But if the interest grows faster than your income, you're trapped. You don't pay it off. You roll it over. You borrow more to cover old obligations. That's not finance. That's a death spiral. That's exactly where the United States is right now. New debt isn't being issued to build something productive. It's being issued to pay interest on old debt. That's the moment a system stops functioning and starts feeding on itself. Economists have 1,000 polite terms for this, but the reality is brutal. The math no longer works. And here's the part that should make you angry. This didn't happen overnight. This wasn't a surprise. Anyone who understands basic arithmetic saw this coming decades ago. But instead of fixing it, the system chose the easier path. Delay, distract, deceive. When interest costs rose, they didn't cut spending. They didn't restructure the system. They printed more money. And every time they did, they made the problem worse. Because printing money doesn't erase debt. It just hides it temporarily by weakening the currency. That's why inflation never really goes away. It pauses, it slows, it cools, but it doesn't reverse. Because the underlying cause, the debt, never shrinks. It only grows. Inflation isn't some mysterious force of nature. It's not bad luck. It's not just how the economy works. It's a mechanism, a deliberate one. And once you see it for what it is, you can't unsee it. Here's the simple truth they avoid saying out loud. Inflation is how the system pays for its mistakes, by charging you instead. When the government borrows too much and can't raise taxes without backlash, it prints. And when it prints, your money quietly loses value. No vote, no announcement, no apology, just less purchasing power every time you swipe your card. That's why this debt crisis suddenly shows up in your grocery cart. Eggs cost more, gas costs more, rent costs more. Not because farmers got greedy or cashiers got lazy, but because the dollars in your wallet are worth less than they were yesterday. Inflation isn't random. It's the bill coming due. Think about how clean this trick is. If taxes went up overnight, people would revolt, headlines would explode, politicians would lose elections. But inflation is silent. It spreads the pain slowly, unevenly, just enough that people blame each other instead of the system. That's why it's the favorite tool of governments drowning in debt. And here's the part that should make you furious. Inflation doesn't hit everyone equally. If you live on a salary, you lose. If you save cash, you lose faster. But if you own asset stocks, real estate, anything tied to the system, you're protected, sometimes even rewarded. Prices rise, asset values inflate, and the gap widens. That's not a side effect, that's the design. So when they say inflation is cooling, understand what that really means. Prices aren't going back down. Your money isn't getting stronger. It just means the theft is happening slightly slower than before. The damage is already locked in. This is the invisible tax, the one you never agreed to, the one that never shows up on a ballot, and the one that allows a completely unsustainable system to survive just a little longer by draining you, little more every day. And if you're wondering who benefits most from this setup, who stays insulated while everyone else feels the squeeze, that's not an accident either, because inflation always has winners, and they're closer to the money than you'll ever be. The chaos you're living through isn't accidental, it has architects, and once you know who they are, a lot of things that never made sense suddenly click into place. Money doesn't enter the economy evenly, it never has. When new money is created, it doesn't magically appear in your bank account. It enters through very specific doors: banks, financial institutions, asset managers. The people closest to the money source get it first. Everyone else gets what's left after prices have already gone up. This is called the Cantillon effect. But don't get distracted by the name. The idea is brutally simple. Whoever touches the money printer first wins. They buy assets before inflation hits. Stocks, real estate, entire companies. By the time that new money reaches wages and consumer prices, the game is already over. This is why the system feels rigged, because it is. When the Federal Reserve creates liquidity, it doesn't hand it to workers, it hands it to institutions. Wall Street gets cheap money, corporations refinance endlessly, mega funds scoop up assets, and when things go wrong, they're too big to fail. Losses get socialized, profits stay private. Look at who thrived during every crisis: 2008, 2020. Every so-called emergency, markets were saved, asset prices recovered fast. Meanwhile, ordinary people were told to tighten their belts. That's not coincidence, that's priority. Firms like BlackRock don't gamble on this system. They design strategies around it. When money is cheap, they leverage. When prices inflate, their assets rise. When things break, they're close enough to power to land on their feet. They don't fear inflation, they weaponize it. And here's the uncomfortable part. None of this requires secret meetings or evil villains in dark rooms. The system rewards this behavior automatically. If you're closest to the source of money, you benefit. If you're far away, if you work for wages, saving cash, live paycheck to paycheck, you absorb the damage. That's why inequality explodes during inflationary periods. That's why the rich get richer while everyone else feels like they're falling behind no matter how hard they work. The system isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. And when people sense this imbalance, when they feel the rules changing against them, trust erodes. Not just trust in money, but trust in institutions, in leadership, in the future itself. That's when things get dangerous. Because once enough people realize the game is rigged, they stop playing by the rules. They look for exits, alternatives, ways out of the system entirely. And that's where this stops being just an American problem. Because the rest of the world is watching, and they're making moves. The world is quietly preparing for a future where the dollar is no longer untouchable. No press conferences, no dramatic announcements, just slow, deliberate moves happening behind the scenes, while most Americans are told everything is fine. This is how trust dies, not with a bang, but with a shift. For decades, the dollar ruled because everyone believed it would. Oil was priced in dollars. Trade was settled in dollars. Reserves were held in dollars. That trust allowed the United States to export its debt to the rest of the world. America printed. The world absorbed. It was an incredible advantage, and it was abused. Now that trust is thinning. Countries are asking a dangerous question. Why should we hold a currency that's being diluted this fast? Why should we save in something that's losing value by design? Why should our future depend on a system we don't control? So they're adjusting, quietly, buying gold, signing bilateral trade agreements, reducing dollar reserves, building parallel systems that don't need US approval. BRICS isn't a headline, it's a signal. China isn't posturing, it's hedging. These moves aren't about dominance, they're about protection. And here's the part most Americans never hear. If the world stops absorbing US dollars, those dollars don't disappear. They come back, home, all at once. Trillions in excess currency flooding back into the domestic economy. Too many dollars chasing too few goods. That's how hyperinflation starts, not overnight, but suddenly enough to shatter lives. This is why officials panic at the idea of de-dollarization. It's not about pride, it's about containment. As long as the dollar is global, the pressure stays spread out. Once it isn't, the full weight of decades of debt lands on American soil. History is very clear on this. Reserve currencies don't fade gently. They hold power until they don't. And when the shift happens, it accelerates faster than anyone expects. Rome learned that. Britain learned that. Every empire thinks it's different until it isn't. This is no longer just a financial issue. It's existential. Because when trust in money dies, everything built on top of it starts to wobble. Governments lose control. Social tension rises. And the illusion of stability vanishes. The scary part isn't that this could happen. It's that the conditions are already in place. The only question left is what you do when you realize the system you depend on is far more fragile than you were ever told. Here's the last part. No fear porn. No fantasy solutions. Just reality. First, don't panic. Panic is how people make irreversible mistakes. Every collapse in history has two groups, the unprepared and the calm. The calm don't win because they're smarter. They win because they understand what's happening early enough to adjust. Second, stop trusting that the system will protect you. It won't. It can't. System drowning in debt always chooses self-preservation over people. That doesn't mean rebellion. It means awareness. It means you stop assuming your savings, your income, or your retirement are automatically safe just because they always were. When money weakens, hard things matter. Things that can't be printed. Scarcity matters. Tangibility matters. Gold has survived every collapse, not because it's exciting, but because it's boring and reliable. Bitcoin exists because trust in institutions broke. Self-sufficiency matters because systems fail unevenly, and those who depend on fewer moving parts suffer less. This isn't about becoming rich. It's about reducing exposure, reducing blind faith, reducing the number of promises your future depends on. The more layers between you and your survival, the more fragile your position becomes. Understand this clearly. The goal of the system is not to make you secure. It's to remain functional. If that requires sacrificing purchasing power, savings, or stability, it will, quietly, legally, efficiently. That's not evil. That's how systems behave when they're cornered. The people who come out intact are the ones who recognize the shift early. They don't wait for official confirmation. They don't wait for headlines to turn honest. By the time the truth is openly admitted, it's already too late to move cleanly. Seeing this doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you prepared. Because the $38 trillion trap was never meant to be obvious. It was built slowly, hidden behind complexity and comforting language. And now that you see it, you don't need to panic. Karma. You just need to stop pretending it isn't real. And that awareness, quiet, calm, deliberate is how you survive what comes next.